Let me introduce Mr. Stanford Johnson. He is an East Tennessee native and a member of the First Families of Tennessee. He's also a highly decorated two-time honorably discharged and former homeless Army veteran in recovery from co-occurring disorder. He published his debut novel, Our Little Secret, the Smoky Mountains family saga and coming-of-age story inspired by true crimes in November 2021. He published At the Dead Hours of Midnight, A Bloody Reign of Terror in the Great Smoky Mountains on behalf of Richard Way in December 2022. He credits the desire to write Our Little Secret with saving his life and the writing of it healing him. He graduated from the University of North Carolina in 1990 as a former United Methodist senior pastor and former TAC officer at Valley Forge Military Academy. He enjoys hiking in the mountains, and his favorite thing to do is to spend time with his son Zachary and Zach's lovely girlfriend Vanessa. He also edited A Young Tiger's Tale, a coffee book table of U.S. Air Force aircraft photographs taken by Lieutenant Colonel Richard Way, USAF retired, and Stan's currently busy working on a memoir. So please put your hands together and welcome my friend, Mr. Stan.
Who all here already knows something about the Whitecap saga in Sevier County? Okay. It obviously happened in the 1890s, so that's 130 some odd years ago. But we're still able to, through research, find information that has never before been published. I think that's what it says in the brochure, the Wilderness Wildlife Week brochure, is that we have found some things that we published in our book that had not been published in any of the other books previously. Now, anybody, I don't have a television. I've not had television since 2009. It's on purpose. But I hear there's a show called Yellowstone. Mm-hmm. I would think that this would line up fairly well with Yellowstone based on what I hear about that TV show. I mean, this saga had it all. It had an organized crime organization. They were the bad guys, known as Whitecaps. It had a counter-vigilante group that rose up to combat the Whitecaps called the Bluebills. And it has other good guys, a group that eventually became known as the Law and Order League. And I'll talk more about that later, because Sevier County, the best way I can describe whitecapping in Sevier County is it was a cancer. It started out in one incident up around Emmer's Cove, Greenbrier, Copeland Creek, in late 1891, 1892, and then by the mid-1890s, it was in all the civil districts in Sevier County. Like I said, it has it all. The world's oldest profession allegedly started it all. As I understand that, Knox County had a crackdown on prostitution in the late 1880s, and some of the women brought their trade to Sevier County, up around Copeland Creek, Greenbrier, Emmer's Cove. I'll talk more about that later. It has gun battles. There's a battle known as the Battle of Henderson Springs. I think that was 1893 or 1894. There was supposed to have been a gun battle on the streets in Sevierville at Doc Henderson's house. I read somewhere it was reported, no, there weren't any fatalities reported during the gunfight, but there were supposed to have been a number of suicides reported around the county the next day. And the story may even have a couple of scapegoats, because the numbers E.W. Crozier published the first book about whitecapping in 1899, around February 1899. And in it, he said there were between 650 and 1,500 of these vigilantes, these whitecaps, conducting up to a dozen raids a night. Somewhere in the Crozier book, it says that they were taking place virtually nightly. 2 men, Catlett Tipton and Ples Wynn, were the only 2 that were ever brought to justice and hanged for murder. So that's why I want you to consider the possibility that those 2, just because of the sheer numbers of activity that's been going on, that those 2 were scapegoats. Because after they were hanged, they had committed the murder on December 28, 1896. They were in jail until they were hanged July 5th, 1899. So they were in jail, and they put their stories together, and they'd originally denied involvement, but eventually, they were scheduled to be hanged earlier in the year, a year earlier, and they both made confessions to get their consciences clean. Some of you may recognize this guy. When I was growing up, we would watch Dragnet and Joe Friday. You know, he'd be interviewing someone at a crime scene, and then I guess the person he was interviewing would start going off on a tangent, and he would bring him back, just the facts, man. So that's what we tried to do with this. I'll talk more about why I got involved with it later. But we have tried to tell it as thoroughly and fully and accurately as possible. In that effort, I can say that I read all the books about whitecapping in Sevier County. I found a master's thesis by a guy named William Joseph Cummings III, published in 1988 at UT, that answered a lot of questions I had that I believe changed the DNA of the whole story. If you notice on the cover of the most recent book and on the first slide, I said the true story of organized crime in Sevier County in the 1890s, which is what I believe it became. I made several trips to the Special Collections Library at UT. Richard Way, the co-author, and I went and took 1,100 pictures. It didn't really go well, so I had to go back and take 1,100 pictures again. I went to the State Library and Archives, to the McClung Collection. Does anybody know who May Owenby is? May Stamey Owenby? Her great-grandfather was John Sam Springs, who I dedicated the book to John Sam Springs, and I'll tell you why later, and Tom Davis, Sheriff Tom Davis. I think they're 2 heroes. But May Owenby, she is from the Greenbrier, Emirates Cove area, went to school at Pittman Center. The only woman ever elected superintendent of schools in Blount County, and she was also a state representative. And she's still with us and still a firecracker. But she shared a lot of information with me and gave me access to some things that had not been previously published also. And then, of course, Carol McMahon and Tim Fisher helped with the project. And then I accidentally subscribed to newspapers.com. I know what you're thinking. How do you accidentally subscribe to newspapers.com? Well, it goes like this. You see, you go to the website, it says, here, sign up for a 7-day free trial, right? 7-day free trial. You sign up, you give them your credit card or debit card, you forget about it, and 8 days later you're a member, you have the subscription. But I would encourage you to take the 7-day free trial, and remember that you've taken the 7-day free trial. But it's really worth it, because I had access to hundreds of newspaper articles. Not only in the region, these news stories, some of these news stories made it to the West Coast. And then there's another website, I think it's called Chronicling America. Another newspaper website that has archived newspapers. When John introduced me, he said, I'm a member of First Families of Tennessee. My paternal grandmother had a copy of The Connection in East Tennessee, which is a terrific genealogical resource. And in the front it says, in memory of John Myers, Captain William Walker, and Daniel Dunn, our East Tennessee ancestors, and I'm a direct descendant of all three. That was, and my paternal grandmother, she was one of those that paid attention to oral history and asked questions of her grandparents and whoever she had access to when she had access to them. I was having a conversation with somebody else. I mean, I was a knucklehead teenager, you know, and when my granny wanted to sit and talk, I wanted to go chase cars or play ball or chase girls and play ball and run fast and chase girls. But I really wish I had sat down and paid more attention to my grandmother. Now, I have deep roots in Sevier County also. Anybody know who Ples Wynn was? Okay, Ples Wynn was one of the two convicted murderers of Bill and Laura Whaley. And they were the ones hanged on the murder was December 28, 1896. They were hanged July 5th, 1899. But my maternal grandmother, I don't remember ever having a single conversation with her about her family. Not one. That's because Ples Wynn was the younger brother of my mother's 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 mother. That's the second great grandmother on the mother's side. So my maternal grandmother's maternal grandmother was Ples Wynn's older sister. And so their father, I'm not in his direct line, but I am their father, his sister and their father. Their father was Captain Elkanah Mitchell Wynn, Captain E.M. Wynn. Like I said, deep roots in Sevier County. Union cavalryman, served in the Civil War. Sheriff of Sevier County in 1888 to 1890. And then he had these two sons get involved in the Whitecaps. I'm sure many of you have seen this photograph. Carol McMahon calls it an iconic photograph, and it really is. Evidently, on the day of their execution, Ples Wynn and Catla Tipton were asked if they would like to be baptized. And Uncle Ples, sometime the morning of his execution, went down to the East Fork of Little Pigeon River near the courthouse with a lawman in the water with him and the minister, and Uncle Ples was baptized. I published Our Little Secret, John said, in November 2021, and I was looking for something else to write about. Anybody hear my talk yesterday afternoon? Okay, so you know the story behind why I write the stories I write. They pick me, I don't really pick them. So I learned that Richard Way had published, or he had paid Bob Wilson to write The Eyes of Midnight. So I read his book, and I had lots of questions. So, like I said, the first book written was in 1899 by E.W. Crozier, a publisher. And a lot of people give credit to Tom Davis. You'll see newspaper articles and other resources that credit Tom Davis for having a large part in writing the Crozier book. And I'll tell you this, I like giving away stuff, but you can find it on the internet and download it as a PDF. free. So that's good reading, because it was in real time. I don't, newspapers aren't carved in stone. They're just not. And back then, most news traveled on horseback or word of mouth, and eventually telegraph and telephone. But the Whitecaps were notorious for cutting the wires between Sevierville and Knoxville. So news didn't travel very quickly and very efficiently. It was not the information superhighway. Everybody knows who Kaz Walker is. Well, that's why Richard Way got involved in the book, or in the whole telling of the Whitecap story. Richard's out there at the table with the books, and when he'll be 79 in June, but when he was a teenager, he was a Knoxville Union musician, and he played on the Kaz Walker show. And when Kaz wasn't selling groceries on the radio or television, teenage Richard and Kaz would lean up against a rolled up canvas, and Kaz was telling Richard all these high tales about whitecaps and bluebills and gunfights and whippings and hangings, and that part's factual. He published the first edition in 1937, the second edition in 1974. So Richard had a lifelong interest in researching and finding out about as much as he could about the Whitecaps. And then, of course, I said I read The Eyes of Midnight. And I consider, so that book is only 2016, published in 2016. The reason I ended up writing the book is after I read everything that I could find, all three books, newspaper articles, I eventually found the Cummings thesis. I still had questions. And I don't like to read a book and have questions when I finish, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. I want it tied up, a bow put on it, wrapped, put a bow on it, a tag, that's it. Well, I had questions, and that's when I found the Cummings article. And of course, this is from the Crozier book, but most people, he says about the year 1892. I'll show you a newspaper article in a minute that is from January 1892 that says they had formed 6 weeks earlier, which puts it at the end of 1891. So that's why I had a lot of problems with some factual things, but also the whole timeline. As I understood the original narrative, the group of prostitutes moved into the Copeland Creek area. The good folks up there didn't want them in their neck of the woods. The judge couldn't get convictions against them because nobody would testify. So either in a cafe in Sevierville or in a court, the judge basically said, if nobody will testify against them, y'all handle it yourselves. At least that's how, whatever he said, that's how it was taken. So, sometime thereafter, in the Crozier book, I think he says a couple of men and some wives went and left a bundle of hickory sticks on the porches of all of the houses of ill repute, with a note attached to it that said, leave, or we're going to come back and whip you with these. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be whipped with a hickory stick. Well, they didn't leave. It's believed that the wives encouraged their husbands to go back and make good on their promise. The women were dragged into the night and whipped and left. This is where it becomes a cancer. Here's a map of Copeland Creek. You can't see it that clearly, but if in fact this is where the original whitecapping took place in Copeland Creek, this is from a family collection at King Family Library. I don't remember which family book it's in up there, but I photocopied it. So, I mean, if you really want to trying to figure out who the wives were that wanted to go find out who, get rid of the white caps or the prostitutes. I mean, they're all Sevier County names. This structure is still standing. I believe it's Copeland Creek Road, and it's rumored that that's one of the original structures in which the ladies of the night conducted their business. And that picture was taken maybe 3 years ago. I pitched an idea to John Elder about an excursion during Wilderness Wildlife Week. And I talked with Steve about it back here. A tour of the significant white capping, where some of the significant white capping events took place in Sevier County. I mean, my vision for it is, you gather, give a brief overview, and then maybe go to Emmerich Cove first. The John Sam Springs homestead is still there, and he battled with the white caps. I believe he was the original bluebill. But you can start there and maybe go to Little Cove or Jones Cove, where activities took place. The breeding woman, the breeding mother and her 2 daughters were whipped in Jones Cove in 1893. McGill was ambushed in Little Cove, coming back from the mill. The Whaley killing took place somewhere out behind the Seventh-day Adventist Church out on 66. That's what Tim Fisher and Carol McMahon believe. The old wind farm on Boyd's Creek Road, I think, Steve, the J.D. Davis home place, and Bob Cadillac place would be part of that. The Battle of Henderson Springs, Battle Hill, Whitecap Lane. It goes on and on. You can visit cemeteries, look at the grave markers of the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think would anybody be interested in signing up for and going on a tour? I think they're free, right? Here at Wilderness Wildlife Week?
Yes.
I think so. That's something maybe you look forward to next year if you know John or want to bend his ear. Mention that to him. One of the big questions I had never really been addressed. It was talked around more than it was actually addressed. Was who was the judge that made the comments either at the cafe or in open court that led to the Whitecaps? Well, this is a March 1897 article when Sheriff Tom Davis, and Judge Hicks are going back and forth. Now, in the newspaper article, I'm going to read the blocks. It says Tom Davis accused Judge Hicks of being the person responsible for the outbreak of whitecapping in Sevier County 7 years ago, which would have made that 1890. So that moves the needle again on the timeline. And even Judge Hicks, in the next day, he responded in the paper, over 7 years ago, as I now remember, in a moment of anxiety over what I suppose was a refusal of a grand jury to make a presentment and find an indictment. And he goes on that he made a comment that could have been misinterpreted. Well, that may set the timeline back a little bit more. If they're talking in 1897, then it happened 7 years ago, that puts it at 1890 instead of 1891 or 2. Because here's the thing, this is one of the things that bothered me about the timeline. Judge Hicks was a circuit judge. He met in Sevier County in March, July, and November. They would not have had time to do everything they said happened, certainly by the March term. If they arrived in March, he couldn't have lamented in Sevierville that he couldn't get convictions that same month. So that pushes it to July, maybe not, and later. But he admits that in 1890 he made a remark that could have been misinterpreted. This was the original newspaper article that I found about whitecapping in Sevier County. It's from January 27th, 1892. Two interesting things about this article. They were originally, they're known as the whitecap, the Sevier County Whitecaps, or the Whitecaps of Sevier County. But originally, in the first article I could find, they were referred to as the Whitecaps of Emirates Cove. And that's significant, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And it also says in this article that they had been organized 6 weeks, which moves it back into 1891. Now, I told you about May Stamey Owenby. This is John Sam Springs. He was postmaster at Emirates Cove, and he gets credit for eradicating whitecapping in Emirates Cove, which is where it actually started. The young girl in the middle is May Stamey Owenby's grandmother. That makes John Sam Springs May's great-grandfather. I don't believe this picture. I think I took this picture of a portrait that she has. So this is another photograph that has never before, as far as I know, been published. The thing about John Sam Springs, he's the one who said, any man or set of men who would go at the dead hours of midnight and drag a poor defenseless woman from her home and lash her back isn't worthy of citizenship and is a base coward. So that's where I got the title for the book, At the Dead Hours of Midnight. That's what John Sam Springs said. But he also, in a way, bookends the entire saga, because it starts in Emirates Cove in 1891 or 2. He runs them off. And he was the foreman of the grand jury who returned a true bill against Ples Wynn and Catlett Tipton that ultimately led to their jury trial and conviction and being sentenced to hang. And legend has it that he was on the gallows and placed the nooses around the necks of Catlett Tipton and Ples Wynn. So he really, and he's another one that I dedicate the book to. John Sam Springs and Tom Davis. Have any of y'all ever been here to Emirates Cove? A retired dentist named Vince Engel owns the place now. And he erected these two markers. I'm not going to read them, but it says Colonel John Sam Springs Memorial Cemetery. It's really, I think, catty corner to Emirates Cove Cemetery. But he, I guess, these are my words, these aren't his or anybody else's, but I guess, I don't know if he was ashamed because of his participation, and he's the one that put the nooses around the necks of the ones that were hanged. But he felt unworthy to be buried in a Christian cemetery. So he's buried in an unmarked grave on a hill behind the homestead. The homestead is still there. If you catch Vince there, he might let you come in and he'll show you bullet holes where they'd had battles and peepholes where they looked out to shoot. Now this is from the Cummings thesis. Once again, during the winter of 1892. Beginning of the second paragraph, women were the first whitecaps in Sevier County, but not the first vigilantes. It had been alluded to in previous publications that women were involved in the beginning of it, but never just outright stated that they were the first whitecaps. Which, you know, I mean, knowing human behavior makes sense. Now here is the Whitecaps' oath. I think Crozier, you know, they give Ples Wynn credit for this particular version. It's on the front of Cass Walker's book. It's in the Crozier books. It's probably in my book. But it sounds pretty intense about voluntarily doing this. And what does it say? I take this oath freely and voluntarily. if you'll indulge me just a second, I'm going to read from the Crozier book. And this doesn't exactly sound like, it doesn't sound freely and voluntarily to me. When a person wanted to join, he gave his name to the one who was known to belong to the order who proposed his name. The time and place of initiation was fixed, and the applicant informed. At the appointed time and place, which is always at night, and generally at the home of some white cap, the would-be member was duly catechized by the chief mogul or high cockalorum of the order as to his fitness for the duties which a member of so important an order and the hazardous undertaking in which he was about to embark required. If after examination he was found worthy, he was then told to stand up and let the oath be administered. The applicant would then be immediately surrounded by members of the order with drawn pistols, two of which would be cocked and presented at his breast while the oath was being administered. I'd probably take an oath too if somebody was pointing two guns at my chest. So that doesn't really sound freely and voluntarily to me. It's believed that, I'm going to read another passage. I don't generally read these things, but it's generally believed that the reason Bob Catlett wanted Laura Whaley killed was because Bob Catlett had made her write a white cap note, and after she wrote the note, he made her take the oath. And she betrayed the oath, so he put a hit out on her. Now this is also available online. This is William Joseph Cummings' master's thesis from 1988, free download. One of the questions I had, now Sevier County had about 20,000, a population, if you look at the census records in 1890, Sevier County had a population of about 20,000 people, about 4,000 voting age males. And Crozier said there were between 650 and 1,500 white caps. I don't know about you, but I don't know any other organization that grows that efficiently, that quickly, or that exponentially in such a short amount of time. So the mechanics of their growth was not, I didn't find it anywhere else I read. I mean, there were allusions to the county court and justice of the peace. Here's another newspaper article, May 1892, the White Cap movement originated in Emmons Cove. An organization called the Blue Bills was formed, and it's whispered that the leader of the gang is Justice of the Peace. I've got a theory about who the leader of the White Caps was. Do you have an idea who it was? That's what I mean. He's a candidate for sure, but I'll tell you who I think the high cockalorum or chief mogul was. William Wynn. William Wynn was Ples Wynn's older brother, Nancy Talitha Wynn's middle brother. He'd also been a justice of the peace. He checks that block. He was also superintendent of the work farm. Who are you going to run into at the work farm? Huh? Criminals. He was a member of a prominent Sevier County family, the Wynns. That's my theory, is that William Wynn, and there's another reason for it. I don't know if I have the newspaper article in this presentation, but you can't make this stuff up. In 1898, April 1898, when Ples Wynn and Catlett Tipton were finally being tried and convicted, William Wynn had a confrontation with the sheriff, Millard Fillmore Maples, outside the courthouse near the stable, and I think Maples shot Wynn 5 times in the gut. Gut shot William Wynn, who died in the next morning, April 7th or 8th, 1898. The thing about the newspaper article that is interesting to me is they interviewed Tom Davis, who was sheriff now because Millard Fillmore Maples was under an indictment too for killing William Wynn. But Tom Davis, he wrote Sevier County. They asked him for a comment in the newspaper, and he said, now that he said, Billy Wynn has been the bully of Sevier County for the last 10 years, and I think whitecapping will go away now. That's just me trying to connect some dots, but I can back those dots up. I can tell you exactly why I think William Wynn was the high cock of orange, the one behind it all. Another thing I do not understand, here's the part I didn't understand. How did they grow that efficiently in such a short amount of time in Sevier County in the 1890s? First sentence, shortly after the charivari of the prostitutes in Emer's Cove, white cap gangs were organized by justices of the peace. That's organized crime. If elected officials, which is what JPs were, collude and organize white cap gangs to go protect their men by dismissing cases. It was really, it started out for one reason, ostensibly it became a cancer for another reason. But I've got yet another theory about what their actual motivation was. There's no real clear documentation that I've found on how they chose their victims. I mean, it's generally known that they were doing all these night raids and whipping and dragging out and killing and shooting. 650 to 1,500 of them up to a dozen times a night, maybe nightly. But who were the victims? I've got a theory about that. The other question I had that is alluded to in all the other books and everything else I ever read. Okay, so how were they able to protect their men by dismissing white cap cases in the court? Does anybody know the answer to that? Yeah, that's exactly right. How did they get there? Two justices came from each civil district, except for the county seat, which was represented by 3 members of the county at the county court. The county court was made up of justices of the peace. The county court impounded grand juries. There's your answer. I've never seen that presented that way before. Once again, it's organized crime. Now, has anybody, if you've seen any of these books, you've seen these 2 sketches. Laura McMahon Whaley, the young woman who Bob Catlett had write the white cap note, who they put the hit out on, that Ples Wynn and Catlett Tipton broke in and killed. Lizzie Chandler was Laura's sister. She was in the room when they broke in and killed him, December 28, 1896. Laura Whaley had a baby that had been born in September. So she had a 3-month-old baby. This is 3 days after Christmas, 1896. They break in. They know why they're there. That she's broken the white cap oath. They've come to kill them. They begged for their lives. And she asks if she can give her infant daughter to her sister who's in the same room. She hands Molly, the baby, to her sister. And I think they cover themselves with a blanket. And Catlett Tipton shoots both William Whaley and Laura Whaley point blank range with 12 gauge shotgun and double up buckshot. So if they had masks on, anybody know how they found out who they were? What's that? No, not as I understand it. What I have read, and I don't remember where I read it. Now he had a mask on. They both had masks on, but I don't. Like I said, I can't source this right here off the top of my head. But evidently, Ples Wynn dropped something, and when he pulled away, the mask did this, and she saw his profile. Okay, Fair enough. A few days later, Sheriff Davis brought Lizzie Chandler to a hotel in Sevierville on the second floor, a busy day, and to watch the crowds go by, and she was able to pick him out. She said, "There's the killer of Bill Whaley," right? Now, why do I have these sketches up here? I've told you I've researched this exhaustively. These two are the actual photographs from which the sketches were made. At least I believe they were. It's obvious to me, not great photographs, but whoever sketched the picture of Laura Whaley and Lizzie Chandler, that's in the Crozier book and the Kazawalker book, and maybe in House of Midnight too, in our book, I found the actual photographs, which I thought was a real find. I mean, I found them in 2021. And the only way I can date the photograph is by Laura Whaley's murder, which is December 28, 1896. This was a great newspaper article. I think it's in June 1929, which, if you think about it, was coming up on the 30-year anniversary of the hanging of the murderers. June 1929 would have been 30 years after the actual murder. Now, these people in the picture, starting upper left, is Tom Davis, Sheriff Tom Davis, a hero of Sevier County. I think if there were a Mount Rushmore of Tennessee sheriffs, Tom Davis would be on the Mount Rushmore of Tennessee sheriffs. What he did, and the guy with the bow tie in the middle is Judge Nelson. There are pictures, the sketches on this newspaper front page were made by H.P. Iams from the Iams Nature Center. Now I went looking for. I'm hoping somebody has those, a family member, an archive somewhere, because if he had those two sketches, there's a likelihood that there are others. The next one is the next two on the right, up at top and bottom, are the Minot brothers. One of the brothers was the Attorney General for Knox County, and his brother was a prosecutor of the Whitecaps. And the guy with the mustache and the oval at the bottom is J.R. Penland, who is another prosecutor of Whitecaps. They had to go to extraordinary means, take extraordinary measures to eradicate whitecap. As you've seen, I think I've demonstrated the legal system was so corrupted that they would never have gotten rid of them without outside intervention. W.A. Parton was, I think, the state representative. He introduced a bill at the state legislature in 1897 to move the jurisdiction of Sevier County Court underneath Knox County. The Knox County judge and Attorney General came to Sevierville and prosecuted him, which had a ripple effect. The newspaper, there's a newspaper man, I think William Montgomery is his name. He was with the Sevierville Star. And some people didn't like the fact that Sevier County was going to Knox County to help solve their problems, right? It offended some people. So William Montgomery, as I understand it, left the Sevierville Star and started his own newspaper called the Sevierville Vindicator. I mean, this is in everything. It's in the judicial system, legal system, politics. It's stated that as the Whitecap movement grew, the numbers were so significant that they curried favor. The politicians curried favor with it for obvious reasons, right? Politicians, they want to get voted. They curry favor with the Whitecaps, shop owners, all civic leaders at every level, I believe. These let's see, Penland, And Tom Davis and a guy named Dr. Massey is in this article. You can find this article on newspapers.com. The beginning of I think it's in the beginning of the article, it starts with a meeting of the Whitecap leadership talking about putting bounties out on Nelson, Penland, and Massey. Massey, it's believed, was one of the informants, Dr. Z.D. Massey. I'm coming up on about 12 or 13 minutes left. I think this may be my last slide. So this is sort of what the cover looks like now. I keep playing around with the covers, trying to figure out which ones pop off the shelf better than the others. Somebody from Moon Pie General Store stopped by this morning as they came in. She said, "Oh, I really like the new cover." It really grabbed me when I walked by. I'm like, okay, good, that's what I was going for. I just wanted to create 2 works so far that I can be proud of. You know, the fact that I spent hundreds of hours, road trips, taking 2,200 pictures because the first 1,100 didn't come out the way we wanted them to. I mean, you can access all of these things that I've accessed. I don't have any special access to any of this. UT Special Collections Library, Hodges. Oh, you have to go online, fill out a form, you can go look at it. There's another collection in the Special Collections Library called the Donald Payne Collection. As I understand it, Donald Payne was an attorney who was interested, had a family connection to Whitecapping. The Peter Prince Collection is a collection of photographs and other physical items, documents that predate the park, that he was able to gather up before they went to somebody's sinkhole. We had a sinkhole in town, and my grandmother said everything was going in the sinkhole. So Peter Prince was able to collect and archive, and Special Collections Library, UT got a hold of it. So all this is available if you want to check anything out. Newspapers.com can be fun to look at. I mean, I've got literally hundreds of newspaper articles stored on my computer. But I would be glad to answer any questions that anybody has about Whitecap.
Can you explain a little bit about the bluebills?
Yeah. Okay, yes, ma'am. The Bluebills were a counter-vigilante group that rose up to combat the Whitecaps. Now, as I understood, some of the original credit for starting the Bluebills was given to Dr. Henderson. Dr. Henderson went to Jones Cove after Mary Breeden and her daughters had been whipped in May 1893. Mary Breeden died as a result of her whipping. I mean, this was not when they drag you out and beat you, they beat you mercilessly. So the original genesis of the Bluebills, as I understood it, was given to Doc Henderson after he visited Mary Breeden in August 1893 and was outraged because they had been beaten so severely, and Mary Breeden died. But as I think I've shown up here, Doc Henderson could not have started the Bluebills in August 1893 if they were mentioned in a newspaper article in January 1892. So that's one of the things I found that clears up some of it, I think. Doesn't diminish what he did. I mean, Doc Henderson, he was killed, shot by a jealous husband because Doc Henderson had been seen at a Knoxville hotel with, she was the daughter of the sheriff, maybe, or something. There was some sort of connection. But that's how I understand the Bluebills started. And somebody said earlier, somebody stopped by the booth and talked with me and said, oh, the Bluebills were the bad or the good guys. I'm like, well, they were not as bad as the bad ones, I guess. But I mean, at least their motives were in the right direction. They were combating the Bluebill or the Whitecaps. But yeah, that's my understanding of how that started. And of course, the reason Kaz Walker, I guess one of the reasons Kaz Walker wrote his book, he was so interested in it. His father was Tom Walker, who was a Bluebill. So, yeah, Tom Walker. And he mentions, of course, Kaz being Kaz. I don't know, I don't know the veracity of everything that is in his book, but take it, there's a lot there that's legit. Yes, ma'am. You had a question? Is that right? No? I'm sorry? Oh, later? Okay. Oh, wow. I like those. Anybody else have a question?
I do. You said that weren't the Pleas family, his family, a reputable family that had wealth and land?
Which family?
William and Pleas, the
Pleas,
brothers.
yeah, sure.
Their father
Mm-hmm.
had money and land. You think he might have, without saying it or without, knowing it, you think it goes on up to that? Because,
My impression of Captain Wynn
well,
is that he was an honorable man. I'm not just saying that because he's my third.
had kids.
Yeah, well, that's right.
Yeah.
He was a lay pastor in the Methodist Church. His father, I think, was Ashley Wynn, married to a porter. And he married a Trotter, all prominent Sevier County names. Wynn is one of them. And as I understand it, when I knew a little bit about the story, but not enough to talk much about it, I used to say that basically he sold the farm to try to get his kid off, to save his kid's neck. He lost the farm and the kid. And William Wynn, my money's on him being the...
Yeah. I just didn't know if it, but it doesn't sound like it goes past William.
I'm going to tell y'all something that I probably shouldn't tell you because it's classified. It's intellectual property, I guess. The sound guy told me not to go too far forward or I'll get feedback. Here's my theory about why it spread into all the civil districts. Well, you saw the mechanics of how it did it through the JPs in each civil district, being members of the county court, impaneling grand juries. That's the mechanics of it. Here's my theory. And I came up with this theory after I read Wilma Dykeman's book, I think, The Tall Woman. East Tennessee has a unique story to tell about the Civil War. East Tennessee. If you go back to 1860 and 61, before the Civil War broke out, there was a movement to separate East Tennessee from Tennessee and make it its own state, like West Virginia. Right? So I'm always amused. If you're a family member from Sevierville and your family's been there for a long, long time, there's a 96% chance that you were a Union family. That's just how it is. If you run around in a Confederate shirt, okay, good for you, I guess, but you probably weren't a Confederate. But here's my theory. I think what somebody got the idea to do, really a generation later, Civil War ended in 1865, White Capping started around 1890, 25 years, a generation. Residual hostility from the Civil War. A lot of the prominent family members, landowners, were Union affiliated. And Sevier County, there was no strip out here with flashing neon lights and Dolly. This was a rural, poor Appalachian county. That's why $50 to kill a couple. It doesn't sound like much. No life is really worth any price. But $50 was a lot of money there. If you know about the Civil War in East Tennessee, It went bad. It went bad early for the Confederates, particularly in East Tennessee. A lot of conscripting going on, being forced to serve, probably with guns pointed to chests. There were a Union Army would come through, a Confederate Army would come through. The desertion rate among East Tennesseans in the Confederate Army was way out the roof. Deserters going through the hills and hollers, two armies, bushwhackers, the home guard, everybody trying to find some need. And I'm telling you, there was a lot of cruelty inflicted on the people who stayed behind. Flash forward 25 years. Hey, this whitecapping thing worked up in Emirates Cove. Why don't we go back and settle an old score with these Confederate families? I don't know. Possible.
Didn't whitecapping actually even spread into other states? I mean, they were over into, I mean, it's not just an East Tennessee thing. It went up into Indiana. It went down further south into other.
Right. As
I
understand
it got
it,
bigger.
I call it, people ask were they the KKK? No, they weren't racially motivated. As I explain it, I call it a family tree. And it started, the earliest place I could find was in Indiana in 1839. And it started with people putting on masks, going out whipping husbands who were not taking care of their wives, drinking, just poor, no goods, ne'er-do-wells, to correct them, to beat them into submission. Okay. So that's where it started. But then you got, I think they're just branches of the tree. So it started there. This group became what they became. KKK became what it became. There's a group called the Bald Knobbers. I can't remember where they were. There's a group out around Reelfoot Lake.
They were the Night Riders of Reelfoot Lake, and
Okay.
the Bald Knobbers was over at Branson, Missouri.
Okay, it's in the book. I just couldn't remember where they were, but I knew there was a group, Bald Knobbers.
And you had a tobacco patch wars with the people fighting over the price of tobacco with Duke, as in Duke University.
Right.
And that was in Hopkinsville, Princeton, Kentucky, and Clarksville, Tennessee. Those were the three mainstays.
Right. So yes, I mean it wasn't isolated East Tennessee.
And all of these was the late 1800s, early 1900s, or something about that 20-year period.
That's right.
That most of it took place.
And I think the theory is legitimate, as the theory goes, that there was its residual hostility from the Civil War. I mean, to be on the scale that it ended up being on. I mean, how else were they choosing their victims?
Well, it's kind of hard to believe that it's over women, prostitutes, and a man living with a woman that he's not married to.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It seems deeper than that.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's how it supposedly started, upholding Victorian morals and standards of conduct and behavior. Cummings, in his master's thesis, talks about community consensus. And he says that at least on some level, after the whitecapping methods in Emirates Cove had worked, they perceived that as acceptable. That there was a community consensus. Hey, it worked here. Let's go around. Let's go visit all the other whoever. So it just they somewhere in the book I call them a brood of vipers and den of thieves. That's all they were, thugs. A brood of vipers and den of thieves. Well, it's 6:30. I managed to. Wasn't sure I'll be able to talk for an hour. I woke up with something this morning. I hope you were entertained or enlightened, educated. Any more questions?
I want to follow something. I'm not sure that I followed something on this.
Mm-hmm.
Were the two ladies that were killed, the Whaley lady and the other lady, were they killed? They were killed by the Whitecaps, and is that right?
Well, Pleasant and Cattle Tipton, yeah, they were Whitecaps.
And so, were they ladies of ill repute? Was that why they were?
No. I mean, The next program is at 7. I think it's ABC. And that's a good question. What had happened was the Whaley couple were tenant farmers. And Bob Catlett had a cabin that he was going to let them move into, grow corn, pay their rent, sharecropping, tenant farm. Well, when this was December 1895, a year before the murder. When they showed up to move into their new house, cabin, shack, a guy named, he was a Maples, I don't remember his first name, was still occupying the cabin and wouldn't leave. It was Bob Catlett's place. He was going to let the Whaleys move in. This Maples guy wouldn't leave. So Catlett and his brother-in-law, Bob Wade, went to they ended up settling in a farmhouse on the Wynn place, Captain Wynn. That's how Ples Wynn knew in the dark how to go find where it was. Bob Catlett and Bob Wade went to Laura Whaley, made her write the white cap note to pin on the Maples cabin to tell him to leave or they were going to come back and whip him. So they had Laura Whaley, who was semi-educated, was able to write the note. He made her take the white cap oath. They went, nailed it on the door, and just for good measure, I guess, peppered it with a shotgun blast or two. Well, word got around that had happened, and Tom Davis, I guess, approached Laura Whaley asking her if she would be willing to testify against Bob Catlett. So he wanted her put out of the way before it went to jury trial. It's all in the book. I mean, I could do a lecture series about a week long because it covers a lot. It's unbelievable. I mean, the whole story. Make a great mini series, probably TV show. Does that answer the question?
Thank you.